Welcome back at another episode of Kynotalk by Kynotalk. And again, I have a new guest, this time obviously again in English, so
hopefully... English, ah. En anglais. Ce n'est pas possible de faire l'interview en français oder auf Deutsch.
Je ne comprends pas, mais let's just talk English.
Okay. Actually, I'll drop a little German and French in every now and again, just to try to make people think I'm smart, and also to try to relate to your viewers who are francophone or German speakers.
For sure. So actually, that's a cool thing. Our listening community is growing, and also more and more people from French-speaking countries are joining. So we see this in the statistics, and obviously, so we have the bias that French people, also Italians, would not like to learn English because they just are very proud of their own culture and language. But I see the younger generation obviously is changing and is interested in other people speaking in other languages. So they're more and more coming into our show.
Well, I am very interested in speaking other languages. Unfortunately, I am very stupid in languages. So what languages I have learned, I have forgotten. But I tried.
Obviously, a few of us, and I think and I will introduce you in a minute, you're one of those people who obviously understand a lot of the language of dogs and canines. So it'll be very interesting to go with you through the questionnaire and some of the topics that you suggested yourself. So now for the listeners, you already heard him, the man of the hour, Dr. Stewart Hilliard. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
We met a few months ago when I had the pleasure of being invited to California, Santa Rosa, at Michael Ellis' place by Cameron Ford, and we went for dinner one day with all the guys. You went there because you had a big symposium, the Kinology symposium, that lasted for a week or something, 5 days. And I was just happy enough and lucky enough to meet you and honestly to find out about you. For sure, your name has been listed and present here and there when I was talking to friends and colleagues from all over Europe and from the US. But interesting enough, obviously my education so far has been more to European trainers. So I've been after European trainers and not that much in the US working dog community, except of Cameron, because I got to learn about him from the podcasts and so on. So I've tried to find out more about yourself, since I thought the first morning of Kinology that I was able to listen, because then I had to catch my flight back to Europe, was very interesting. And I
I forgot that you came to part of the symposium. That's good.
Yes,
that's good.
Yes. Yeah, so I enjoyed the first morning, and for sure I already could pick some of the things that Michael and you presented there. Also a style of presenting that I thought is very interesting, and some of the informations and views I thought are very helpful.
Did you hear the cussing?
Yes, I learned about your love of cursing at the dinner already. So feel free to curse in all languages that you know.
I'll try to keep it clean. Zabel, yeah.
So that was a cool thing. No, I really enjoyed it, and actually already, I liked the road of paper that you put on the wall just to put all kinds of notes there and to summarize the questions of the audience, and also to add some. I don't know what else you did throughout the week, but I already copied that, and I just started to at workshops to hang on my portable whiteboard, and people could just add some questions in the breaks and share some thoughts. so that we would not lose them throughout the progress. But that's not the point. So I didn't took me long. So I found this intro of yourself at Canine Training System. So I will also put this link to the show notes. And of course, I did not just read about you on the web. I also listened to other podcasts that you did already, also with Cameron. And I thought it's very interesting because, believe it or not, you're in a very good shape, but you do this longer than I'm old. So, and that's so impressive. So, Stewart Hilliard
it's one of my messages. If you'll forgive me for interrupting you, it's one of my messages about dog training is that if one treats it not just as a physical skill, but also a way of engaging intellectually in a very difficult endeavor, like something that's hard to do, right? Mm-hmm. If you engage with it intellectually, it's something that you can develop in across the span of your lifetime and never lose interest. And your participation and your interest in dogs, it may change. It probably will change, but it's something that first compelled me when I was about 20 years old, and it still compels me. And that's one of the things that I try to get across to especially younger people who are interested in dogs, is that this is something that can nourish you throughout your life. It's something that you can stay interested in, you can develop personally, you can develop physically, and you can develop intellectually through an interest in dogs. And that's why I call what I do kynology, is because it's not a hobby. It's a part of my identity, and it's something that's formed me. And it's presented me with challenges and defeats and successes and all kinds of things. And I still want to do it, 40 some odd years later.
Wow. It's a way of living,
please
right?
Let me know,
it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle, and it's a lifelong calling. I don't know if your viewers will know what we mean in English by calling, but for instance, people who are religious are called to their vocation. It's something that they feel committed in terms of their spirit to doing. And sometimes I feel a sort of a calling in my interest in dogs.
Yeah, that makes sense. At least for me, it doesn't. You were interested right before who our listeners are.
So please tell me about your listeners
for a second. So, for sure, I don't know all of them, but I know some of different backgrounds or with different backgrounds, and most listeners are obviously from German-speaking countries, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also the small.
Guten Tag alle Sportfreunde und Hundespezialisten.
Very nice, very nice, and also, well, people from US. I think US is listed third place. It's like Germany, Switzerland, US, Austria.
So I was wondering about that. If a lot of other Americans would see this, or if it would be strictly a European crowd.
No, and since I've also invited not only Cameron but Pat Nolan, and then from Australia, Pat Stewart, and oh damn it, I forgot his colleague's name.
Ja, das befällt mir auch.
Yeah. Oh man, but
I do that all the time.
Never mind. And of course, people from various European countries. So I love to see how the community is growing, and these people are from agencies, so they're from the working dog side, military or police. They're from customs, but also from the sports world. Since, for example, Chris, my colleague at the company, his origin was in dog sports. So was mine. Mine was in the rescue dog sport and obedience. His was in Schutzhund and IGP. And so I think there is a big group of listeners, and also from regular dog trainers, like pet dog trainers or companies like ours who try to locate themselves in this market of training working dogs and cooperating with agencies, but also with the civil side. And also a few, in German I call them anspruchsvolle Hundehalter.
Und was meint das auf Englisch?
That means anspruchsvoll means, oh damn it, I have to look it up. In English, that means challenging or demanding pet owners, but not in a negative way. So they really want, they're not having enough with just reading a few books about how to make the dog clean and clicker training. They want to find out more and what abilities dogs have and how much we can enforce them. And I think that's the group of listeners.
In English, we call these people serious. Yeah, it's the word we use. Serious.
Yeah, serious.
Yeah,
that's
serious.
That sounds even more.
But I
serious.
like the German better. Challenging. I like it.
Yeah, because they challenge their trainers, right? And they're not stopping asking questions, and they challenge
themselves, which is a reference to what I said a minute ago. You know, that's what it is about dogs and dog training. Is it challenges you if you engage with it. It challenges you.
For sure.
And if you try hard, you develop. And if you become technically good, your dog develops too.
So you've started quite early, as I learned, being a dog trainer, also joining a Schutzhund club, which is funny for us that you guys called it Schutzhund and not just protection dog. So you went with the German. You didn't translate it, but sounds good. So the funny thing is, when we German-speaking people talk about the American Schutzhund, we even try to pronounce it like Americans do. So it's not a German pronunciation anymore.
We all of us. I don't know if it's still the case, but when I began in dog sport, we identified very heavily with the German aspect of this German form of dog sport. Mm-hmm. So we tried to learn the language. Of course, we called it Schutzhund because it was an item of European culture. We were acutely conscious that it was European culture, and we wanted to embrace the European part of it, especially the sport friendship, the attitude towards the breeding of dogs, the preservation of their functionality as dogs. So we didn't just decide we liked the sport. We decided that we liked the European, especially the German approach to breeding, keeping, and being responsible for and safeguarding a breed of dogs. Mm-hmm. So of course, like we used German commands, we used German expressions on the training field. Those of us who could learned as much training field, Ausbildungsplatz Deutsch, das wir können. Yeah, we learned as much German for the training field as we could.
That's impressive. And you traveled to Europe. I think you tried to train yourself and educate yourself in Europe. Also, you got to know the French ring and Belgian ring. I've learned that you've been one of the first, if not the first, I don't know. I think Cameron got that into my head. One of the first, if not the first, people who imported Belgian Malinois to the US.
I was an early importer. Very small numbers of dogs, but I was an early importer. Yeah.
Wow. And that's having a huge impact, obviously, on the working dog world and the sports world. But you're not only a trainer and a dog enthusiast, a kynologist. Also, you're a scientist. So you studied a lot about this. Maybe you can help me out now and tell our listeners what you've been studying apart from training dogs and really got your hands on the dogs, because right now you're in charge of a military working dog program. You still are, I think.
Yeah. So I'll give you my brief biography, how I got here. I became interested. Actually, my first dog that I tried to train, I was 14 years old. And I held the book in one hand, and I took the leash and the dog in the other, and I tried to train the dog. And then later, when I was about 19 years old, I talked my mother into buying a German Shepherd dog. and we bought a German Shepherd dog from a German breeder, a breeder of German Shepherd dogs from the SV of Germany. It was actually a Kirchental bitch. So my first dog was a Kirchental bitch from Carl Fuller's breeding.
Okay.
And a really good dog. And so in between 20 years of age and 30 years of age, I trained professionally. I trained pet dogs. I trained in clubs. And also I was trying to break into police dog training and being a professional and so forth. And then, but at the same time, I sort of wanted the story I always tell is that my back hurt. So from all the bite work I did with dogs, and I'm very tall and kind of thin and not very strong, right? So my back started to hurt. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to last. I can't do this all my life. I need to use my brain to make a living. And also I became interested in behavior. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so I was interested in zoology and biology and so forth. And then when I was in my early 20s, I became much more interested in behavior and also aware of my weaknesses as a student. Like organic chemistry was a problem and calculus was also a problem. Okay. So it was easier for me to go to school as a psychologist. And when I was about 30 years of age, I went to graduate school, which is the way our system works is you get you go to high school and then you finish high school and you're about 18 years old. Then you go to an undergraduate university or college and usually get a 2 or a 4-year degree. And then if you're lucky and you work hard, you can get into a graduate program. In my case, it was a graduate program for psychology. And so I went there for 8 years because I was taking my time and didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I went to the psychology graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin in what they eventually put on my diploma, behavioral neuroscience. So that's behavioral neuroscience, which is just a fancy term for studying the learning of animals. So I got a PhD in the learning of animals in about 1998 and immediately went to work for the U.S. government in a working dog program, first as a researcher, and then later through a number of transitions, I became what I call a production guy. So for many years, my job has not been to do scientific research. It's just been to produce dogs, to make dogs for the U.S. government. And then this is the point at which I should say that I appear here in my private capacity. I do not represent the positions or the policies of the U.S. government in any way. I just represent my own personal opinions on any topic whatsoever. And what I do right now is I run a breeding program for DOD to produce working dogs for the military. And then also I'm quite active in what we in English call a side hustle, which is basically providing high quality education about learning and behavior to serious kynology and dog trainers and enthusiasts like yourself and other people, hopefully around the world. And so what I try to do is to bring some objectivity and some science and some perspective to many subjects that interest all of us that have to do with dogs training, the ethics of dog training, the ethics of welfare, the ethics of working dogs, the ethics of companion dogs, the technical practices of training dogs to fit into what in English we call the envelopes that they must behaviorally in order to be what I call joyful and joy-bringing for the owners and for members of society, members of our society.
Okay. And we will get closer into the topic of your side hustle that I think you also share with Michael and Forrest. Yeah. First, I want to ask you the shortcut DOD. What's that about? What does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry, Department of Defense.
Okay, that's the DOD. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. What I really like about yourself, about you, is I don't know. People are having their first impressions when meeting. So I think we had some nice short chats when being at the dinner. But
and
then
also
I also
good food. Also
very
good food.
What was it? It was some Peruvian or
hell, I don't remember.
Latin America, but it was really nice.
Yeah,
good beer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the ice shop was closed. I remember afterwards, but never mind. What I liked watching the video clips that Michael has just shared when you were decoying his young dog. So you're still doing this. You're not just leaning back and playing the professor and writing books, which is impressive, but you're still lying on the ground and enforcing a full grip and playing and screaming and trying to do the very best. How much do you enjoy it? So why are you still doing this?
That's like asking me why I started it. The same reasons. Part of it is the connection to the dog that you have when you participate with the dog in conflicts, and when you work with the dog to make him stronger, and when you work with the dog to manipulate his moods and teach him how to use his moods. Part of it is the physical aspect of it. It was my athletic sport when I was young to put on the suit and to work with biting dogs. So I do it for the same reasons I did it before. That's actually a very difficult, that's a profound question, a difficult question to answer. I guess ultimately what the answer is that it's an expression of my identity. To engage with a dog. I don't know. There are all kinds of ways of getting close to a dog. To have the dog, sit with you on the couch and watch television, it's one way to get close to a dog. Another way to get close to a dog is to do engaged obedience, where you and the dog make very close contact if you do good work. And another way to make very close contact with the dog is to engage in a social conflict with him. And I always liked it.
I think for me, I was not putting myself into the biting world for a long time because I just did other things, right? I grew up, I started in the search and rescue community. Since back then, I also worked as a paramedic for the Austrian Red Cross. We don't have a paramedic system, but it's the easiest to translate it. And throughout the years, I got to know Chris, who was also at the Vienna police and responsible for the dog training there. And I've always wanted to know what it feels like to being bitten, right? Even though it's just through a sleeve or in a suit, but I think it's a very interesting experience. The very first few bites that you take.
It brings you very close to the dog, and also it brings the dog very close to you. There's a few ways to talk about it, but many years ago, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a French friend whose name is Jean-Michel Moreau. And Moreau was a high-level decoy who played at the Cup of France in the suit in, I think, the early 80s. And he and I were talking about a dog called Vico de Turenfels, who was a tremendously hard biter, and also a dog who dominated the homme d'attaque, the decoy, right? The dog had his way with you. And Jean-Michel told me a very funny story because he was bitten. He finally had his chance to work in the suit at the Cup of France. And he was very excited, and he trained, like he went running. He did kilometers in his suit. He got a special suit made. It was his time. It was his debut. He was, it was his big day. And about a week before the Cup of France, he was bitten in the back of the lower leg by a dog in training. Like a leash broke and the dog came and bit the shit out of him in his lower leg. And his first thought was, I can't let anybody know, I'm gonna work the trial anyway. And so what he did is he went to a doctor, either knew somebody, whatever. He went to a doctor and he had a small but very hard cast put on his lower leg around his, what we call the calf in English, right? Yeah. He had a very small cast put on that part of his leg. And he said the problem was that Vico was so fast and had so much technique that he could bite you where he wanted to bite you. And also in those days, the technique and the abilities of the French ring decoys, les hommes d'attaque, were not as highly developed as they are now. So a really good dog could kind of dictate the terms. And Vico was very fast, very hard biting, and he had a preferred place to bite. And only the very, very best decoys could prevent him from biting there. And it just happened to be where the dog had bitten Jean-Michel in training. And so he had to protect that place with a cast. And then also he spent the entire passage of the dog on the field in bite work trying to prevent Vico from biting that particular part of his leg. And he could not. Vico did exactly what he wanted with him. And he said that by the end of Vico's performance, that the cast was in a shred around his ankle and his leg was bleeding. But what it has to do with our topic was that one very interesting thing that Jean-Michel said to me was he pointed out the difference between a dog who has hard character, a dog who has strong character, and a dog who has the physical constitution to bite hard. They're not the same thing. A dog who bites very hard is not necessarily a very brave dog, and vice versa. But he said that dogs who bite extremely hard, it's important that they also have strong character because they attract retaliation from decoys.
Okay.
Right? Because you come in close to the dog bites you on hidden equipment, or the dog bites you in a thin suit, you feel it personally because you feel the power of the dog and it hurts, and you're a little violent in return in the way you deal with the dog. And then if the dog has a small character, if the dog has a soft character, it makes him less. And so Jean-Michel said, yeah, if you have a dog who bites really, really hard, he better have character, because people, if he's not being gentle with decoys, they're not going to be gentle with him.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought I thought it was a very perceptive thing to say.
And I wish that even though maybe some trainers will never have to or want to get that close in this kind of work with dogs, but I think in a trainer education, it would be a big thing to put people in a suit. And
the most important thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I presume that as an interviewer, if you give me an idea, it's okay for me to
go ahead
to jump in. I think it's the context, the emotional and the motivational context in which the dog is working dictates the properties of his behavior. So the dog is one thing when he works for a piece of food. The dog is something entirely different if it is a dog with strong motivations, instinctive motivations, and you engage those motivations. The dog is something utterly different. And there is a little bit of a separation between those in dog training who work with dogs only in the lower registers of motivation versus the people who are accustomed to and comfortable working with the dogs in all registers of motivation, particularly when they work with dogs that are selected for some kind of work that maximizes the value of motivation. And so for me, yeah, I think everyone who works with dogs should have an idea what a dog's mouth feels like.
Yeah.
to not be afraid of it, but also to respect it. But also they should accustom themselves to the dynamics and the feelings of a dog when the dog is properly being a dog. Right?
Yeah, right.
Because then you don't really know the animal. And so I think it's very important for, just as you said, I think it's important for people who want to know a lot about dogs, all kinds of dogs, to encounter those dogs in all ranges of motivation. And one way to encounter a dog in a very different state than you may be used to is to do bite work with a dog and get used to the dynamics, get used to the feeling, and begin to acquaint yourself with the idea that a dog is not just what in English we call a fur baby, right? People who have pets and they just want to pet the little dog and they think, and they attribute human feelings to the dog, and then they feel betrayed by the dog if the dog does something wrong. They find their expectations of the dog disappointed. I think if you encounter the dog in all moods, you understand the dog better. And then also it's easier to keep in mind that although you love this creature, it's an animal. The dog is an animal.
Yeah.
And not a person. And this is something I say a lot. I kind of say it every time I have the chance, which is I'm a working dog guy, right? I appreciate dogs for what they do. I appreciate dogs sometimes for abilities that are special and make them appropriate only for limited uses by limited populations of people, technicians. I very much love the dogs. But one thing that it's important to keep in mind is what we get out of our affection for dogs. If we look for the dog to return our love and to be faithful and to be fair and to be unselfish, not only will we be disappointed, but also we will be cruel to the dog because we expect something of him of which he is not capable. And in a way, as we were speaking a minute ago, we will retaliate. The value in an emotional engagement with dogs is that it's what we exercise about ourselves when we love a dog, when we know that the dog may not return the love in exactly the way that we give it to them. You can't trust a dog to be faithful. You can't trust the dog to be fair. You can't trust the dog to not follow impulses of his own that might hurt other dogs or might hurt people or other livestock. You can't trust the dog in these ways that you might trust a person whom you love. But when you love a dog, understanding what he is, it is for yourself an exercise in developing your own abilities as a human being.
Yeah. And many people don't like to hear this, but I think that as you described it, it makes a lot of sense. Would you say that dogs are opportunists?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
and that's not a
I see the only thing, I am an opportunist. You are an opportunist.
Yes, for sure.
Presumably both of us have ethical systems that give us pause, that make us hesitate when we contemplate taking advantage of an opportunity that will infringe upon the rights of others. The only thing that stops us from doing that, well, two things: empathy and an ethical system based on empathy, right?
Yeah.
I see no evidence of an ethical system in dogs, which means that when they see an opportunity, they will seize the opportunity in my experience. And when the opportunity is something that I've arranged for the dog so that he seizes it, then it can be very good for him. It can be good for our relationship. If the opportunity is something he seizes that is dangerous for him or bad for him or dangerous for me or stressful for me or dangerous or stressful for other human beings or other animals that belong in society, then it's an opportunity that the dog must not have. And there are two ways to control that. One of them is with perfect control of the environment. And the other one is with good control of your dog. And most of us accomplish responsible stewardship, responsible ownership of our dogs by doing both of those. We control our dog's behavior, and we also control as much as we can the environment that our dog encounters, but we seldom have perfect control of the environment, which is why we must have very good control of our dog, aside from predicting what our dog will and will not do, because none of us can perfectly predict what our dog will or will not do.
For sure, for sure. And controlling the environment is something that can be like this is sort of an illusion that can be created for a pet dog or through a training, but for sure not in deployment. Or am I getting you wrong?
No, it's you can't even control it for a pet dog. So where something that we'll turn to in a minute is talking about the dialectic, which is an English word for an ongoing conversation, like a debate or an argument between two points of view. And the idea behind a dialectic is not necessarily that it will eventually be solved, like one side will be right, will be proven right, or the other side will be proven right. The idea is that the topic itself is advanced closer to truth as a result of this never-ending conversation between two pretty irreconcilable points of view, right? And so the dialectic in dog training right now, as it is in all kinds of keeping of domesticated animals, is between those who advocate strictly what I call appetitive behavioral control. And appetitive is a fancy psychological word which stands for the use of only rewards in training, either bestowing rewards upon the dog or taking rewards away. Aversive control.
So this is talking about positive reinforcement and negative punishment.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then aversive control refers to the use of negative reinforcement and positive punishment, right? And these are the four things that we just discussed are the standard contingencies in instrumental conditioning, right? The four procedures that we can carry out. They're not forms of learning. They are formal procedures based on probabilities of one event and another event, right? And so the ongoing dialectic is between people who think that we should use only rewards in dog training and other people who think that we should use anything available to us that is ethically defensible and also appropriate to the goals and can be used while preserving the dog's welfare, that we should use all those tools in training. That's the ongoing discussion. And in that respect, and you are very well aware that this dialect has affected the conduct of working dog training, both professionally and amateur sport training in Europe, and it may also begin to affect it in North America as well. But the dialectic is very strong. The argument is very strong in the training of companion dogs, because it's not just working dogs that have strong motivations to do stuff. Some pet dogs, companion dogs, can have very strong motivations to do stuff that is either stressful or economically damaging or dangerous for owners, for other members of society, etc. And so there is a large and a very vocal contingent of kynologists, kynolog and kynologists who say very strongly that you should only use positive reinforcement to train these dogs, and that all you need to have is technique and knowledge, and you can get it done. They base this very much on using procedures to, at least in the beginning and for much of training, to exert very strong control of the environment, which means that if you have let's just pick a little terrier that you keep as a pet, and the little terrier develops what in English we call leash reactivity, where the dog goes apeshit, either through fear or aggression or predatory excitement when it sees another animal. And let's say the dog has a low threshold for frustration as well. So half the time when he goes at another animal, if you stop him with the leash, he turns around and bites your leg, right? So you have to just keep letting him do it. What the first prescription from the pure positive community is, well, you have to control the environment very carefully until you're ready for that situation, until you put all of the behavioral tools in place and you're ready for that situation. Well, here's the problem. A lot of people who have leash reactive little terriers live right next to other people who have children, automobiles, bicycles, other dogs, etc., and they cannot accomplish the necessary environmental control. They cannot keep their neighbors inside. They can't keep children from showing up. Whatever the problem is, they can't keep it from arising. So for me, it's not just in working dogs that it's appropriate to talk about aversive control. It's also extremely appropriate to talk about it in the context of companion dogs, because people have problems with companion dogs that ruin their lives if they love their dogs, and also ruin the dogs' lives. And some of these problems are what we call intractable to solutions, meaning they cannot easily be fixed, to solutions that only rely on environmental control for long periods, so that positive reinforcement contingencies and negative punishment contingencies, if they are applied with enough skill and patience, can have the necessary effect.
Yeah. And there is one of the big problems, I think, the skills and knowledge of people who are really able to apply those consequences to dogs. So, for example, in Austria, it's we are having a very strict animal welfare law for more than a decade now. We're not allowed to use tools, etc. I think we have maybe even the strictest animal welfare law worldwide. Don't take me too strict on that, but I think so, actually. So even not in police or military work, trainers are allowed to use aversive tools. But for sure, all those, let's say the consequences of the quadrants, they work and they exist. Like the science is not coming with our law, that when our law says we are only allowed to work with positive reinforcement, that the science in Austria is like, okay, then we just go with 2 more quadrants and let's leave the other ones out. I think the problem since then is, given that people are not able to, and not even like people from military, police, or whoever, maybe specialized dog trainers, are not able anymore to find out about those things without being in a gray zone, talking about law, like doing things that are not allowed, to figure out, to understand things like that. So they're like, in the hunting community, people are going abroad, maybe to the Czech Republic, to attend in e-collar workshops that are given by German trainers who basically live in Austria, but they have to go to the Czech Republic to do those things. And it's not like I want to highlight the use of e-collars or something, because of these laws that are given, people found out very stylish ways to train powerful working dogs with everything that is given and allowed. For sure, there are things that are changing constantly. Also, the style of training influences the selection and the breeding of dogs.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, and we see these changes in the dog's attitude, in their force and mentality. But of course, everything is changing, so I'm not against the change itself. But what I think is, to make a point, what I think is so, not even frustrating, but it's so sad that people are constantly trying to put the the aversive side of control. It sounds a little harsh. Aversive control it does not sound that sexy, but
it's just a technical term. Yeah. Think of in English, the root to the word aversive is to avert, which means to turn.
Right. That's
great. One averts one's gaze. So one way to think of aversive control is not that you're causing pain, but that you are detouring. You are causing the dog to turn away from one behavioral option into another behavioral option. And the force, the necessary, and this is something, if anybody cares to ever tune into one of my lectures, or one of our Kinology lectures, one of the points I'll make is that the most useful definition of unaversive is not how painful it is, because we don't know how painful it is. The most useful and the most scientific definition of aversive is something that functions as an aversive, meaning that if you present it following a behavior, you will make that behavior less vigorous or less probable in future, right? If you take it away following a behavior, you'll find that behavior becomes more probable or more vigorous in future. Well, guess what? If you withdraw food that the dog expects after the dog engages in an act, that will have a punishing effect. The definition, it meets the definition of an aversive. Aside from how painful any of us guess about whether or not it might be for the Cocker Spaniel to not get a piece of food that it expects, what we can all agree on, if we track it carefully, is that it has a punishing effect on behavior. And what I like to point out is that in the hands of good technicians, the levels of what I call hedonic aversiveness. And so what I mean by hedonic aversiveness is hedonism is the seeking of pleasure. When we refer to hedonic value, what we're saying is what a stimulus feels like to a person or what a stimulus feels like to a dog.
Yeah.
The hedonic value of a stimulus does not define whether or not that stimulus can work as a punisher or a reinforcer. It's the function that's important. And when this becomes really plain is when you see aversive control performed at a very high technical level by people who are expert at it. And you see dogs that do not show evidence of suffering. They do not show behavioral depression. They do not show what we call negative affect. They don't show bad emotions. The only way that you can tell aversive control is being used is that you notice when a stimulus is presented, it makes behavior less likely to occur. And when it's taken away, it makes behavior more likely to occur. And I had a very interesting experience because in a forum where it was not going to be a popular message, I did a presentation about aversive control. And I was warned beforehand that it would not be a popular talk and that I would have to defend myself after the talk was over, that people would disagree with me. I showed video. After we looked at a lot of video and I concluded and say, are there any questions? People did indeed want to argue with me. Do you know what they wanted to argue with me about?
Let me know.
They wanted to argue with whether what I was doing was really aversive control or not. The reason they wanted to differ with me is that they did not see signs of suffering. And in their mind, aversive control must be marked by the presence of suffering on the part of the dog. Because they did not see suffering, they did not recognize what I was doing was technically aversive control. And I was very happy with that outcome because what I said is this means that I can go to a conference for people who practice purely positive dog training, and I can practice aversive control in a crowd of them outside with my dog. And all they will see is that my dog is happy and he is taking food.
Yeah, right.
They will not see the aversive contingencies because they only think of aversive contingencies as causing suffering and pain. If they do not see suffering and pain, they think it must be a positive reinforcement or a negative punishment procedure.
That's very interesting, and I think, and I did the same. So I was in the same belief that there is only black and white, you know. So when I learned about the quadrants, which is a very nice, so I have it in front of my inner eye, and I see it. And when I first learned about it,
for English speakers, you're referring to what's called the contingency square. That is normally used as a teaching aid by people with a behavior analysis, which means a Skinnerian behavior as kind of a background. Right? The contingency square is what we call that in English.
So it was either or, positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. But it's not either or. There are so many nuances. So I can
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I can just hand over a treat, a kibble, or a slice of cheese, or I can elevate the value of the dog's reward. I can also elevate the intensity of a punisher. So if I take away the tuck, this might have a bigger impact if I would compared to just taking away the kibble, because maybe the dog's value is higher towards the tuck or the kibble. And the same goes for the aversive technique of a positive punishment. So it's not cruel, It's like being able to have a certain dose on the consequence that goes towards behavior, and this is the part that we trainers need to understand. We need the skills, we need the knowledge of how to dose rewards and how to dose punishments, because I think we can even make bad things happen when doing wrong rewards. Elevating the dog through the roof, in German, you might even know this saying, we say, Trieb macht dumm, which means too much drive.
Drive makes stupidity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the dog is not able to learn anything useful anymore, because they're just in the orbit of pleasure, but maybe this turns into frustration, and then it becomes even punishing to the learner.
Yeah. Müde auch macht dumm. Yeah. Because when the dog is physically exhausted, he also becomes stupid. I wouldn't argue that when the dog is highly motivated, he becomes stupid. What I would say is that there's very much to interfere with his performance. He may know exactly what he is supposed to do and be unable to do it because I haven't given him the equipment. When dogs are tired, you could almost say, yes, if they have strong motivation and they become tired, they become a little stupid. So, but still, it's the same thing. It's not that they forget what they should do when they're tired, but the first thing that goes is self-control. When a dog is physically tired, the first thing that goes is his self-control, not his knowledge of what he's supposed to do, not his memory of how to do it, none of that stuff. His ability to control himself and do it is the first thing goes away when he's tired. But you said a moment ago, you sort of brought up the subtleties and the nuances that are buried within the contingency square. So the contingency square is very confusing to look at. When somebody takes you through it and you finally master the 4 different contingencies, there's this feeling of like, okay, now I know everything, right? Like I've got it all. It's only a beginning. So let's look at a couple of the nuances having to do with, so when I talked about aversive control and appetitive control, that's a way of segregating the 4 quadrants of the contingency square into 2 pairs that use two different kinds of stimuli, right? So you think, okay, well, if I only work with food, then I'm not doing anything aversive to the animal. It can only be nice. I'm giving the dog something nice, or I'm taking away something nice, or omitting something nice. Well, guess what? One of the benchmarks, one of the dependent variables that's used consistently in studies of animal welfare, in studies of animal stress, et cetera, is in the form of measures of corticosteroids, which are chemical agents that are emitted through actions of the brain and the actions of the brain, which essentially can be used, if they're interpreted carefully enough, as markers of stress. Well, it can be shown, I have a half a dozen papers on my desk, that the removal or the omission of a reward will cause corticosteroid elevations. Also, if I have a thing called an omission cue that tells an animal that it's not going to be rewarded, I can use that omission cue as a negative reinforcer. So if I have a cue, for instance, in a dog training context, we can say, some people use the word wrong when a dog makes a mistake, and the contingency that they're working with is, if you don't meet criterion, I won't reward you.
Is this like something like a no reward marker, or
correct, no reward marker? Okay. Well, guess what? A no reward marker is an omission cue. It's a Pavlovian inhibitor that tells an animal something not nice is going to happen. What happens when you get, for instance, in American banks, we get a statement saying that money, as somebody has paid us, or we thought they paid us, is not going to be paid to us. So we get a piece of paper saying that guy's check was not good. You're not getting paid. Guess what? That's an omission cue. That tells you you're not going to get paid. No one likes to see those pieces of paper. The dog doesn't like to hear, no, you're wrong. And guess what? I don't need to guess at that. I can point to data from scientific laboratories that shows corticosteroid spikes in response to omission cues, and also shows that animals will engage in instrumental responses, meaning voluntary responses, in order to get away from omission cues. In not an instrumental context, but in a Pavlovian context, animals will withdraw from omission cues. They will put distance between themselves and omission cues. So those are behavioristic or empirical indications of what the hedonic value of that stimulus might be for the animal. And those indications are telling us that omission cues are unpleasant. They are aversive, right?
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Hang on just a second. Let me give you one more example, right? So buried in those two squares of give the dog a positive reinforcer or don't give the dog a positive reinforcer is an aversive contingency. Now let's go to the other ones, the positive punishment and the negative reinforcement. It can be shown, one of the recommendations I have for practitioners of aversive control is that they use what are called I guess I'll call them safety cues, is that they use a safety cue to mark successful completion of a criterion response and signify to the dog that nothing aversive will happen. It's called a safety cue, right? Some electric collars have tones on them that you can use as safety cues. Most of us who practice this kind of training, we have a verbal cue that says omission of a punisher. In laboratories, it's quite usual for there to be a safety cue in a negative reinforcement context. And if there's not an explicit safety cue that, for instance, tells an animal that it is successfully moved from one side of a shuttle box to the other side of a shuttle box, and that there will be no electric shock, there are all kinds of other cues that the animal can use, including its own proprioceptive cues, meaning I moved. I know I prevented something unpleasant from happening. So these are safety cues. We can show that safety cues have many of the properties of positive reinforcers, right? They can be used to condition, to motivate other behaviors. So animals will work to bring about safety cues. Also, we can show, well, that's probably enough on that subject. So buried
let
in
ask you,
negative reinforcement procedures, let me make this point, and then I'll turn you loose. So buried in negative reinforcement procedures, there is a very important positive reinforcement process. And the point in time, the point in animal performance at which we see this positive reinforcement process most at work is in well-advanced avoidance responding. When, if you look for fear, right, you think, okay, it's avoidance responding. The animal is doing this on cue in order to avoid a hedonically aversive stimulus. There must be fear, right? There's got to be fear. So if I use an independent measure of fear to check for the level of fear in a laboratory animal that is showing a very, very high level of avoidance responding, guess what? No fear, right? So the question is, at what scientists call asymptotic, meaning maximal, highest possible levels of avoidance responding in a laboratory setting, what we see is the absence of fear measured through independent measures. The question is, what's driving it? Well, a lot of what's driving it is habit and also the work of safety cues, which, as I said, have a lot of the properties of positive reinforcers, which is why you can see a dog trained by a high-level technician who uses aversive control perform actively, joyfully, and show positive affect, even though he's wearing a prong collar or even though he's wearing an electric collar, to show positive affect. In the same way, well, that gets into a philosophical discussion, but that is what I have to say in a nutshell, and I invite you to come and listen to the details sometime, but that in a nutshell is what I have to say about the contingency square and this artificial splitting of it into nice methods and not nice methods. It's not so easy to split up.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's what we call a rant, and I wanted to finish my rant.
For sure. And it makes a lot of sense. So for sure, many of our listeners will want to dive deeper into this. Probably we might be happy enough to have a Kinology symposium here in Europe one day with you guys. But before that,
I would be delighted. I would be delighted to do it.
Concerning the safety cues, how does the learner understand, or where is the association between the safety cue and the not happening consequence? So talking about
there are two ways to do it, and this becomes extremely technical. So it's impossible for me to. That's a very good question, and it's impossible for me to answer the question without getting very technical. So I will try to skim over the details a little bit, and if this interests you and you want to know more about it, then in future I will have more education available. I will have 2 videos up pretty soon, and one of them will tell you some of the basics. But in order to understand safety cues, you have to understand Pavlovian inhibition. And I won't go, essentially in Pavlovian conditioning, what's happening is one stimulus develops the ability to predict another stimulus and entrains changes in an animal's or a person's brain to adjust to the prediction that something is about to happen. In Pavlovian inhibition, what's happening is that a stimulus predicts the absence of something important happening, predicted on the basis of the situation, right? That's a Pavlovian inhibitor. So a Pavlovian inhibitor for something that produces fear or pain kind of produces relief, kind of produces something that feels good. A Pavlovian inhibitor for something that makes an animal or a human being feel good feels kind of bad, right? So what we talked about a minute ago, when I tell my dog wrong, what that is it's a Pavlovian inhibitor for, if I'm using food, it's a Pavlovian inhibitor for food. It means no food. The dog doesn't like to hear that word because it means no food. It's the opposite of pleasure, and vice versa. in the context of aversive control and safety cues, what a safety cue is a Pavlovian inhibitor for whatever the punisher is that you're using. There are two ways that association can be established. One of them is through forward conditioning, which is a thing called a cessation cue. Like, let's say, I'm not going to put this in terms of dog training because it would sound like a weird dog training procedure. I'm going to put it in the context of a laboratory study. So let's say we have an animal who is standing on an electrified grid, and the grid goes hot, so the animal's feet are uncomfortable, and then at time 0, the grid goes off. It offsets. There are two ways I can use additional information to predict that for the animal. One of them is through forward conditioning, which is that there's a cue that comes in at 0 minus 5. There's a 5-second cue that says voltage is going to shut off in 5 seconds. That's forward conditioning, and that will make that offset cue, that cessation cue, it'll make it a Pavlovian inhibitor for shock. It'll turn into a nice noise and also a very informative noise for the animal, right? There's another way to do it. You can backward condition it so that the animal is on the hot grid, hot meaning there's current flowing through it, right?
Yeah.
At time 0, the grid goes off, and just about that time, another signal goes on for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
That signal is backward conditioned with the offset of electricity. And guess what? Sometimes backward conditioning works. It's not a reliable rule that backward conditioning never works. Sometimes it does work. It's backward conditioned by the offset of shock. And also, very importantly, both of these cues, the cessation cue and also the safety cue, they're both associated with the offset of shock in a Pavlovian sense, and they predict a period of safety. And they become strong, positive reinforcers.
Yeah. If
that's going, our listeners, all of our listeners out there, if that's going, over your head or past your head, or you want to hear more, let's talk about it in detail. You'll be challenged, right? This shit is not easy to understand. You will be challenged. But that is part of what I began our interview with, is saying that there are all kinds of ways of challenging yourself in dog training. You can challenge yourself emotionally by learning to do bite work with hard-ass dogs. You can challenge yourself technically by learning to do something like free shaping. And you can challenge yourself intellectually by learning this stuff that tells you why the stuff you do on dog training fields that works, why it works, and why the shit you do on dog training fields that doesn't work, why it doesn't work. And then also why, when somebody makes an argument to you is nonsense, that is nonsense, you can detect that it's nonsense and tell them why it is nonsense.
And that's power. Being able to really put in words what you're applying and what you're doing, and knowing how to describe why things are working and not. The cool thing from the discussion that I have learned already is this idea of the safety cues, because what we are teaching our handlers and instructors in our courses is that, that's just our philosophy of how we apply different consequences. So we use announced and unannounced rewards. There might always be a little announcement.
And let me ask you a technical question. What is the utility? What is the purpose of each of those techniques?
It really depends on the situation of behavior. So when I'm talking about reward announcements, I divide behavior or wanted behavior in two big categories. The one is that we always go through first, and later on when it's about specificity and precision, where we want to reward a quick, correct response, getting into the correct behavior very fast, accurate, etc. And therefore, in most cases, and I'm really a detection guy or nose work guy, also searching for people and other substances. I want to have a correct timing and make the dog really understand that the decision of getting into this behavior now was right on top. So I announced the reward right away. The reward announcement went through a classical conditioning, so it's a really reflex-like behavior that comes after the understanding of receiving a reward. And sometimes I want to work on staying in a behavior, so I somehow play with a variable reinforcement schedule where the dog understood, okay, there might be a point of receiving a reward, not really knowing when. So I just stay in the behavior. And for example, a behavior that is oriented to the front, like sit and stare or stand and bark towards an object or a subject, I present the reward unannounced from the back, just a classical throw in the toy towards the source. And this is what we call the unannounced reward, for example, or it's call it a healing, and you're walking, and then suddenly you present the reward for the dog. There might be always a little announcement because of movements or the sound that the ball might make when throwing it somewhere, but it's not an announcement that we worked on by putting it under a reinforcement or a stimulus that announces the positive reinforcement. So this is, I hope you got the point that I was.
No, I did, and my you're making explicitly one important point, which is that even if we do not explicitly predict an outcome, so in formal talk, what we call punishers and rewards, and also USs and Pavlovian or classical conditioning procedures, what we call those are outcomes, right? So it's, even if we do not explicitly predict an outcome with a word or a clicker or something like that, it's very hard for us to produce that outcome without other incidental stimuli predicting the outcome. And that can be a big problem in all kinds of ways, particularly if you train detector dogs, right? But in every phase of training, even when there's not a delay to reinforcement, adventitiously or accidentally conditioned Pavlovian cues. So for instance, you're healing your dog. He's looking up at your face. He's all engaged like he's supposed to do. You're going to try to give him an unannounced reinforcement to really get across to him you're doing just the right thing. But if he sees your hand move, or if he hears your fingernails against your jacket, or he hears the Velcro on the pocket, when you get the ball out, he is no longer doing what you're trying to reinforce him for. He's doing something different.
Exactly.
And that can be a big problem. But
so therefore
that's
we need
one important point that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and that's one very important point that you made, is that even if you decide the appropriate thing and the best thing to do right now is to give an unannounced reward, it's really hard to do. It's super hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Because definitely. It's very often that the reward is announced by a stimulus that you didn't intend, and you instead insert your own explicit stimulus that you can control. Other important point that you made, maybe not explicitly, but for me it was buried in what you were saying.
Okay.
Is something that's a go ahead. But
no.
If I answer whatever, go ahead.
No, I was just listening.
Okay. You're an active listener. You talk a little while you're listening. Okay. So the other important point that you made essentially has to do with the effect of surprise. One of the most important insights about Pavlovian conditioning and instrumental conditioning that has developed since the late 69, the early 70s, late 60s and early 70s, as a result of the work of a psychologist named Leon Kamen, is the conception that it is surprise that drives learning. When an animal or a human being is really surprised by an outcome, that causes the largest increment in learning. When an outcome is very perfectly predicted, that produces lower increments in learning. So one thing I think you're saying is that in order to get a very strong reinforcement of a highly, highly desirable behavior, what you'd like to do is surprise the dog with the arrival of the ball or the reward or whatever you're using. I think that is very sound thinking. Practically, it's super hard to do. Yeah. And if you want to know how this idea of surprise driving both classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning comes in, it has to do with the work of another psychologist named Leon Kamen, and also another psychologist named Robert Rescorla. I named a dog after Robert Rescorla. So there's a dog out there whose name is Rescorla, a great psychologist. And what he did is he developed a pseudo-mathematical model to account for the effects of surprise in conditioning. And if I'm not mistaken, it's an Austrian scientist who I think his name is Schultz, who has verified that on a neuronal level, this is what certain classes of neurons in the brain do, is that they fire when an expectation based on present stimuli is not fulfilled. And what these neurons do is they're discrepancy detectors. They figure out when the animal predicted something and something else happens, and they drive a shitload of learning when that occurs.
Mm-hmm. I have to do some researches on that. So is this Schultz still alive? Or are these older studies?
Oh, yeah. So I think he first pointed out, I hope I have the name correct. I think it's Schultz. And I have the paper over there on my desk, but sometime in the 90s, he did some neurobiological work in a weird animal like a Mongolian gerbil or something like that, in which they were able to isolate this class of neurons who they don't fire when rewards are unpredicted. They don't fire when punishers are unpredicted. They are dopaminergic neurons, meaning that they exert their effects through the neurotransmitter dopamine, and they fire preferentially when something the animal thought was going to happen doesn't happen. Yeah. And they are active when the most learning is accomplished. So that's kind of the neurobiology, and there's all kinds of levels of detail at which to look at this. But basically what you're saying is, hey, sometimes it really serves my purposes to surprise my dog with a reward. Sometimes it really serves my purposes to surprise my dog with a punishment. Hard to do, because the dog is dumb in a few ways, but he's not dumb in being unable to predict what's going to happen next in a training scenario based on all the cues available to him. But if you can accomplish surprise at the right time, you can develop a ton of learning off of a very few, a small number of learning trials.
Yeah. And so this is something that we really try to, or do our best in teaching by purpose, announcing or not announcing. But for example, also the surprise can be announced just when the dog is not yet expecting the reward or expecting it at a different time.
So you can surprise him with the marker, not with the reward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for sure, and actually, this is a little off topic, but I would be really interested in what you think about it, because I talked about it with, I think, even Michael and also with Jens Frank concerning. So it might just happen sometimes that you're using a conditioned stimulus announcement for a reward at the wrong time, and then not giving the primary reinforcer that the dog really expected. For myself, I am not educated enough, maybe, or not experienced enough, or too naive. And I would say, I when I do a click, even if it was a wrong click, I always deliver the primary reinforcer, because that's like an unwritten law. This is the promise that I made. Because if I think about it, I already gave the information of a reward, so the dog already has his dopamine shooting around in its brain. and feeling rewarded. Giving the reward afterwards is just something that keeps the wheel turning. And I don't want I don't want my dog to start thinking about, oh, he clicked, but will he now give me the reward, or maybe not like the last time? So even though I did wrong clicks, they're not happening too many times, hopefully, I would still deliver a primary reinforcement. And how do you see it? Would you deliver a reward even though you did a wrong announcement?
So the situation is the dog has not met criterion, or he's made a mistake, right? Things were looking good.
Exactly. And at the very moment you wanted to click or say the reward announcement, like I use words or sounds I make with my mouth because I lose the clicks all the time. The dog is indicating sit and stare, and when you want to reward, he's losing focus.
Yeah.
And in this very second,
the clearest, that's a good clear example. So let's talk about the dog emits, to use behavior analysis language. The dog emits an undesirable response. You make a mistake, and you mark that response with a Pavlovian exciter, which tells the dog that a reward is coming, right? Well, it's a kind of a no-win situation. If you go on and reward the dog, trying to keep your contract with the dog, if you hear this marker, you will be rewarded, trying to keep that holy. If you go holy, like Holy, holy, right? Heilig. Yeah.
Heilig. Yes.
If you try to keep this contract with the dog holy by rewarding him, even though he made a mistake, then you're reinforcing an undesirable response. On the other hand, if you do not reward him because you marked him at the wrong time and you don't want to reinforce the response, then you're breaking the contract with him. My particular perspective is that particularly because turning the head towards you in a well-trained dog is an exceptional behavior, right? Like he surprised you. You didn't think he was going to do that. So you click that, the head turns, you click, then you pay the dog. That's a relatively uncommon behavior. So the amount of learning that you're going to drive by providing the reward right then is quite strong, right?
Okay.
Now let's go back to your marker. How often have you, if you're using a clicker, how often have you clicked and then rewarded the dog with a Kong or with food? Hundreds of times, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. Every time.
Yeah, in a dog that you've trained a great deal, hundreds of times. How much extinction do you think you will drive with one non-reinforcement?
None.
Not much. None.
Exactly. Yeah.
It'll be invisible. So my piece of advice would be to go, fuck it. I marked him for the wrong thing. I'm just not going to pay him. Right. And the downside of that, I don't think will be that you will weaken your marker. The downside to it will be that you will cause some frustration, which could emerge later on, right? Because what a dog will tend to do when the dog is surprised by a very well-conditioned cue for reinforcement and the dog is not reinforced, is the dog will become frustrated and engage in perseveration. Whatever he was doing, he'll do it hard, right?
Yeah.
But my particular point of view is that better to put my marker on a very, very rich but still partial reinforcement schedule than to provide primary reinforcement for a behavior I absolutely don't want.
But if I understand, so I'm on your side, and this makes sense, and I will also soon tell you another story that I discovered for myself. But
okay, but let me give you a footnote before we close. Ask me to talk about prediction and welfare. Okay. So let's go down whatever dog training rabbit hole you want to go down, because you ask interesting questions. But let's not forget to talk a little bit about prediction, control, and animal welfare.
I put a Rufezeichen to it.
Was mein Rufezeichen?
Rufezeichen.
Rufezeichen.
Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's how to put it. When the learner, I always like to talk about the learner because it works for us the same, probably almost the same way as for the dogs.
It's also politically correct, and we all do it to not sound like
only in
auf English.
In German, we would have to add all the genders. Der, die, das, Lerner, Lernerin.
Genau,
Lernendes.
Ja. Auf Englisch, wir haben das gleiche Problem, aber nicht so viele Alternativen, ja?
Yeah. I will not ask you about your pronouns.
No.
So
I'm just gonna step past that. Not gonna talk about that.
Okay. So what I thought, and I like to develop and understand things new. But what I've thought is when I have created a proper trained and proper conditioned stimulus that announces the unconditioned stimulus, then the learner already feels hyped or rewarded when he's just hearing the announcement. So if I would then
have reinforced. You have reinforced behavior already when you've marked.
Exactly.
Already,
and that was the reason why I thought, okay, I already reinforced it. And yes, we have this not written contract, but we have it. So I just hand off or give the dog the reinforcer. Because
I don't know, you've got me thinking about this now. It's quite a good question. And I would like to ask other experts because
yeah, and it's a very interesting. It's very nerdy, but I like talking about it.
It's not nerdy. It's actually a very I think when we say nerd in English, we kind of mean somebody who loves knowledge or loves detail.
Yeah,
divorced from how much practical value the knowledge or detail is. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't think that this is that kind of question. I think this is actually an important applied question because it's a problem that all of us as dog trainers are going to have, what to do in this situation. And the answer is far from obvious. And I think that I could talk to technically very strong technicians who would have differing points of view. And the more I think about it, the more subtle a question it is. My first approximation would do, because one must be cautious about frustrating a highly motivated working dog, because when you frustrate the animal, in some ways you make it more likely that behavior associated with frustration will reappear, like the whole partial reinforcement extinction effect, the mechanics of putting a behavior on a partial reinforcement schedule in order to make it resistance to extinction. That depends on frustration, right? So frustration is a tool when it's properly conditioned. Frustration is a way of getting an animal to do something again and again and again, even though it's not reinforced, right? So if you inadvertently reinforce an animal at the wrong time, if you inadvertently frustrate an animal at the wrong time in the effort to abolish a behavior, sometimes you can make that behavior reappear in a very, very stubborn form. So when I think about it, my thought is, and I'm not convinced this is the right answer, but you got me thinking about something very, very interesting. And this is what we like to do in the Kynology Symposia, is consider from a background of technical knowledge to consider questions that are difficult to answer. There isn't just a right answer. It's something we can all apply our mind and our experience to. And my initial approximation on that question is, if the mistake that the dog shows is a low probability behavior, something he's never done or he very rarely does, then I might opt to frustrate him after the marker instead of reward him. If it's a problem I'm actively working, meaning he's done it a bunch of times before and I'm trying to get rid of it, and I inadvertently mark it, I might just go, oh, fuck it. I think I'm going to cause more problems by frustrating him right now with a behavior that's already a little bit, habitual or burned in than I am by just going, okay, here's another reinforcer. You got a problem. This isn't going to make it much worse. We're just going to set up and do it again the right way. So I think in some circumstances, I might argue that the course of less danger is to go ahead and reinforce. And in other cases, I might argue that the course of less danger is to go, no, don't pay them. You reinforce them enough with a marker. Let's not give them the primary because this is an uncommon behavior. And I don't want to give him a reinforcement early in his learning history when the effect of each reinforcement is a big increment in behavior. Lots of learning, right?
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. So let me know maybe you will talk to someone about this or a few times. I would be really interested when we meet the next time.
Michael will be a super interesting guy to talk to it about. And
we strive. Is it English? We strived. We shortly talked about it. Unfortunately, I don't know why we didn't talk about it longer, but I still think it's very interesting. And for me personally, and as I said, I'm very eager to learn. But for now, I would still go with if it was a wrong click or if it was the wrong timing, I would still hand over the promised consequence. But what I have go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say my initial take was to disagree with you, but now you have me thinking more deeply, and I'm going,
Yeah. But the interesting thing is I'm working with some tool with a machine that is called the detection dog training system. It's engineered by a German former police officer and trainer, Hans Ebers. Maybe you know him. Maybe not. He used to be.
I've met Hans. Hans. Yeah,
perfect. And he developed this great machine.
Yeah.
So the dog it has 7 holes. Behind every hole there are 2 possibilities: a distractor or a blank, and a target odor. And the system runs and randomizes and at which hole the target odor will be open, and at the other 6 holes there will be a distractor or a blank hole. And there is in German it's a Lichtbrücke. It's like a light signal, and when the dog knows is at the correct hole and is disturbing the light bridge.
So it's a light bridge. It's a visual stimulus which serves as a bridge. Yeah.
Exactly. The machine understands, okay, the nose is in the correct hole, so a reward will be delivered. And the reward is announced, so the dog puts his nose in the hole, the machine understands, okay, correct indication, and the machine does bing, and then releases the kibble through a mechanism. So also there is a mechanic sound after the bing.
Yeah.
And sometimes the kibble is getting stuck all the way down. Sometimes there is a bing and nothing is coming down. So actually a promise has been given, even though the reward was the behavior was perfect, but the dog hears the bing, is like, oh, I'm getting rewarded. And then the kibble got stuck. I don't know why, because the holes are too small, blah, blah, blah. And what is the dog now doing? And we have seen different approaches from different dogs. But most dogs are just, okay, let's continue searching, finding the next correct target. But I think this is because here we have quite a low level of arousal, excitement, motivation, because it's just about the kibble. And I have seen something similar when we were training an attack dog through his first approaches around the corner. So not seeing the subject, running towards the subject and just biting the one, but searching around the corner. I was just a guest at this training, so I was not in taking part in it. And this dog running his first search around the corner, not seeing the subject, being like, okay, they promised me that I could bite someone, but now there is no one. and the dog just hammered into a, not asphalt, but a beton, like really strong stony material. He just hammered into it. He ran around the corner, didn't see a decoy, and the frustration was like, okay, I will just bite anything now. This is very much interpreted by me.
Yeah.
But
So that this dynamic of perhaps withholding the reward after it's been signaled by the marker or the bridge, this dynamic of, should I take the frustration and avoid rewarding the dog beyond the secondary reinforcer, or should I instead keep the contract with the dog and pay him? It also depends on what mood the dog is in, right? So frustration will definitely play a larger and a more important role in the process, in the higher register of the dog's emotions and motivations, right? So frustrating a dog for one piece of food after you've given him 30 in the course of a training session is one thing. Frustrating him from a bite when he will only get 6 in the session, and he's in a completely different emotional and physiological state, totally different thing. Exactly.
So I think there is, it always depends, right? And the art is to figure out what situation are we in, what's the value of the promised reward. And it makes total sense because, for example, like you owe me some €5 and you forget to give it back to me. It's like, okay, it's €5. But if you owe me €5,000 and we meet the next time, you better bring it. So it's a different value, and there is a different
and maybe we're not friends
tolerance.
Anymore. Maybe we're not friends anymore if you don't bring it. Yeah.
So it should really be considered depending the dog, the exercise, the level of understanding. So what is it about? Are we teaching new behavior, or are we already putting pressure on learned behavior that we want to generalize and see in different facets?
Your feed has cut out momentarily. You're frozen. I think you'll come back in a minute.
Do you still hear me?
Hopefully you can edit that out. Yeah, now I can hear you. For a while I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, my uploading is a little slower now. Don't know why. Still having 5G.
So before we run out of time, let me take my own reminder to talk about welfare. So welfare and prediction. So we started earlier talking about the dialectic between those who advocate the use of strictly appetitive control versus appetitive and aversive control that other dog trainers use, right?
Yes.
And that is based upon, I don't think many people say anymore that aversive control doesn't work, although B.F. Skinner said aversive control didn't work. To an extent, Murray Sidman said aversive control doesn't work, etc. I think now it's more of a welfare argument, which is that by using aversive control is equated with distress and suffering. Some people, some technicians, some trainers think that all can be accomplished with well-used positive reinforcers. Why stress your dog, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, the idea behind this debate is that one side of the debate thinks that it harms the dog's welfare to have aversive control used in training. Their assumption is that aversive control equals pain, suffering, and so forth. And if there's another way to do it, you should do it without stress. This is essentially the same thing as saying that welfare is the absence of stress, right? But there is also a technical school in the welfare journals studying domesticated animals in the last 15 or 20 years that does not define welfare as the absence of stress. Rather, they stress in some ways, they emphasize in some ways how low to moderate levels of stress can actually have beneficial effects on coping, functioning, mood, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And also, they find that stress. So, for instance, here's something for you. Stress is often inferred from, we talked about something earlier, corticosteroid hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Stress in laboratories is often inferred from the presence of elevated corticosteroids, either in saliva or blood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's possible to show sometimes that the corticosteroid spikes in a rat who has the opportunity to mate with a female rat are higher than the corticosteroid spikes that the same animal shows when it's shocked with electricity.
Okay.
Right? So corticosteroid elevation in the blood, that's not a one-way, completely solid indication that the animal is stressed, right? So what we're saying is the idea of stress is more complicated than stress is bad. What we should do for human beings and for animals is minimize the amount of stress they have in their lives. For me, a more useful interpretation, and one that stays closer to an enormous body of data that's been developed in laboratories, is that welfare is not the absence of stress. Welfare is the demonstrated ability of the dog or the animal to predict what is going to happen to it and then to control what will happen to it. So I've just finished a lecture that I will soon give about learned helplessness. One of the points that I make, and I'm sure all of the people that are listening to us right now have heard about learned helplessness, is if you haven't, then go read about it a little bit. Just Google it. It'll pop up all kinds of material. The point that I make about learned helplessness is that stress does not cause learned helplessness. It is lack of the ability to offset, to turn off stress, is what causes the condition that was labeled learned helplessness in the late 60s, right? So it's not the physical properties of the stressor, it's the psychological variable of a subjective feeling of one aspect of the stressor, which is when it turns off, that causes the deficit called learned helplessness. So basically what I'm saying is that there are two very, very strong, important components that are relevant to stress, but they are not measures of stress. They're measures of an animal's ability to cope with stress, like you cope with stress in your life and like I cope with stress in my life, because stress is inevitable. It comes to all of us, no matter how much our parents and our society try to protect us from it. You know, our family, stress will come to all of us. And in the end, what it comes down to is how much resilience do we have? How much competence do we have in navigating our way through stress? And I would say dogs are not much different. So this modern conception of a laboratory animals or domesticated animals welfare is not, are there moments in the animal's life where it does not show positive affect? Are there moments in the animal's life where it does not look happy? Of course there are moments in the animal's life where it does not look happy, it does not show positive affect. The more important question is, can the animal predict what will happen to it in the next moment? And can it control what will happen to it in the next moment? Either by engaging actively to bring a reward, or by engaging actively to make a punisher go away, or engaging actively to make a punisher come to an end. These are, for me, the much more relevant and the much more empirically firm conclusions from laboratory studies. What's important about welfare is not, is the dog ever stressed? What's important about welfare is when you train him, does the dog have the ability to predict and control what will happen in the next moment? Not just bad stuff like punishers, but also rewards.
Right.
So a moment ago, we talked about the importance of predicting rewards and the effect of making a prediction that the animal is going to be a reward and then violating that expectation. And I was essentially saying, don't worry about it. Don't reward the dog. You predicted a reward, but it's not going to hurt him any to not be rewarded. But that is not to detract from another very, very important point, which is that prediction is extremely important for welfare, just as control is extremely important for welfare. And there are papers that show that laboratory animals, if given a choice between high voltage, intense shock that is not signaled, not predicted, will choose, I'm sorry, let me change this around. If given a choice between unpredicted, lower level shock that is not as intense and higher shock that is more intense, but that is signaled first, they will preferentially choose the signaled, more intense shock.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is a reliable finding, right? So what that's telling us is that prediction, just like control, is a psychologically very, very important variable, independent of the intensity of the aversive. So what all of this is to say is that for me, what's important is training is not, do I ever see the dog look unhappy? What's important in training is, are moments of unhappiness or stress, are they transient periods through which the dog makes his way successfully? And throughout these procedures, did I equip the dog to both to predict and to control what happened to it? That's how I provide the dog with welfare. Not by trying, oh my God, let's make sure nothing bad ever happens to the dog.
Yeah.
Ask any parent, do you think it's your job as a parent to protect your child from all stress that the child will ever suffer in life? Most parents will say no, because I am going to die. Not only can I not protect my children from all stress, but also I'm going to die, and then they will have to cope with the world on their own. My job is to teach them to cope. This is related to my conception in dog training. My job is not to protect my dog from every little stressor that's ever going to happen. My job is to teach the dog, to help the dog to become the strongest and the most resilient coper that he possibly can be.
Exactly.
And that includes coping with stresses that I introduce to him, because I need his behavior to be different than it would otherwise be. Like, I need him to not bite the dog next door. I need him to not become excited when a child goes by on a bicycle and want to chase the child, whether he's doing it because he's friendly, but he might knock the child over and cause an accident, or because he feels predatory or aggressive, right? So I'll stop talking there. That's a long point. It's a super important point.
Yeah, it is. A few years ago, I got sent this study from Jens. It was throughout one of our educations that I attended at the SWDI, and it was about the three groups of rats. And the first group is in this cage that gets heated, or how did you say it? So electricity is running through the floor of the cage.
Yeah, the current is
Unannounced.
turned on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or electrified. We can say electrified.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there was a second group, and also this cage. So the consequence of the first group was kind of sort of a learned helplessness, because then the rats did not have any information about when the electricity would appear, and also they did not have any chances to avoid it. So when they first got introduced to having the Go ahead.
So the way that learned helplessness has classically been studied in the laboratory involves inescapable stressors, most often inescapable shock, which means there's one aspect of that stressor that the animal can control or not control, which is when it stops, right? And when the animal is subjected to an intense, inescapable stressor, that has a very profound effect on the animal's physiology, immune system, sensitivity to pain, future learning, all kinds of stuff. Compared to animals that experience exactly the same amount of shock that happens at exactly the same time, exactly the same intensity, starts at the same time, ends at the same time, the only difference is that animal does not have the subjective sense that through behavior of its own, it was able to turn the shock off, right? So that learned helplessness effect has been demonstrated hundreds of times in hundreds of different ways. And it can also be alleviated by a bunch of different things. One thing you can do when an animal's been exposed to inescapable shock and it is prone to become helpless in the face of future shocks, one thing you can do is before you start the whole thing, you give the animal experience with escapable shock. Once having controlled shock, the offset of shock, an animal can then be exposed to inescapable shock that it cannot control. And when you test it, you can find that the animal is not helpless because the animal once had control of shock. That makes it resilient in the face of subsequent shocks, and it abolishes or prevents learned helplessness. There's other stuff that you can do that will also abolish learned helplessness. One of them is to do anything to decrease fear and stress. One of the big things that you could do to decrease fear and stress is to signal aversives. Give the animal information about either the offset of the aversive or give the animal information about the onset of the aversive. Both of those manipulations will also alleviate learned helplessness. And this is stuff that in another week, I'm going to be talking about this material in detail, in a lot of detail in California.
In California, unfortunately, too far away just to stop by. But probably I will be happy.
There is an opportunity to register for it online. So you don't.
Oh, that's cool.
We're going to do a live feed, right? So people can also register virtually.
Please send me the link so I can put it to the show notes, and probably people would like to attend. So, but what I wanted to add to
I'll be happy to, and I would. Excuse me?
I just wanted to add something more to the rat in the cage that I started with. So this was the one rat. The second group had the same cage, but the shocks were announced with a little lamp or something. And there was a third group, and they could even change the position to not being shocked. So the shock was announced, like in the second group, but the rat had the chance to not being shocked. Of course, this was a way of learning that the rat could realize, oh, okay, the floor is electrified. I need to change position to run to security or not being harmed. And the interesting thing for me personally in this study was, and for sure you know it, but maybe it's interesting for our listeners, that in the very beginning of the study, all the rats showed the same symptoms and had similar scores talking about cortisol, etc. So feeling the stress. Then, throughout the time, the first group changed behavior because they did not show the stress symptoms. They didn't react to to the suffer that they went through. They just were in the cage.
This is the signaled shock group. The group that were shocked. The shock was inescapable, but they had warning. Correct?
No, they had no warning. So they were not able to know when they would be shocked. But they had throughout the blood and salavia test, they were stressed throughout 24/7, if I have it correctly in my mind. The second group with the signal, they had quite a good time until being shocked. But their stress levels leveled up when they were cued. Okay, a shock is ahead in 5, 4, 3, 1 shock, right? So they were showing the symptoms like in the beginning. When the light was on, they started being stressed out. And the third group, they showed similar symptoms when the light went on, like, okay, the shit is on the fan, but now we have to change position for not being shocked. So they had not the same cortisol level in their blood, even though they showed very similar symptoms. So what the researchers could see, that the rats in group 2 and 3, who were both signaled to be shocked right away, had similar symptoms, but the third group could escape and felt much better. So also,
could the third group escape or could it avoid?
They avoided it by escaping. So changing position in the cage, they could like, I got the warning, so I'm leaving the room.
That's called avoidance responding. Escape in a formal psychological context is something precise and different, right? So the third group of rats could avoid, not just escape shock, they could avoid shock. And
I understand. Okay, escape and avoid is the difference. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah.
For the French listeners, c'est la distinction entre échapper et éviter. Right? They're two deux choses différentes, distinctement différentes.
Très bien. C'est ça.
Ouais, c'est ça.
Great. I don't know how much time you have left, but
we should probably come pretty quickly to an end. But let me say something about that. So you talked a little bit about, one group of rats was in your example, one group of rats was exposed to unpredictable and inescapable shock. Now, it was not unpredictable completely, right? Because probably these rats live in a home cage, and for the experiment, they're brought into an operant conditioning chamber. So the cues of context tell the rat, oh shit, shock happens here, but I'm going to be here for the next 2 hours, and I do not know when that shock is going to occur.
Yeah.
This produces the most intense kind of anxiety, and it produces coping that involves shutting down and taking it, enduring it, right? The second group of rats, they cannot avoid or escape shock, but they know when it's coming. And the evidence is from the core, if the work was well done. Now, one has to be careful interpreting corticosteroid spikes, because it's not like you look at one group of animals with one number for corticosteroid levels, you look at another number, and you can conclude without other information that this bunch of animals feels worse than that bunch of animals. Because corticosteroids are not just a function of how much distress the animal feels, they're also a function of coping, right? So coping as an independent function from suffering or not suffering, right? But let's say the work was well done, and that there's evidence that for the 2 hours in the chamber, the rats in the signaled condition spent periods of time before the signal where corticosteroid levels were low, and behavioral indications were that the rats were uninhibited and felt fine. And then when the signal came that shock was going to come, then they got in a state that the other rats were in all the time, right? So one way to look at that warning signal is that it blocks the contextual cues. The animal is no longer thinking, if animals think, let's put it in anthropomorphic terms, the animal is no longer thinking, when I'm in this chamber, I'm in big trouble. The animal is thinking, well, the chamber's okay, but the combination of the chamber plus the light or plus the tone, then I have to get worried and I have to begin coping, however I have learned to cope, right? But the moment the shock is off, I'm just back with the chamber again, and I am safe. So the animal knows clearly when it's safe and when it's not. The first group of animals can only go by the presence of the cues in the chamber, and potentially by temporal or time-based cues about when shock gets more likely. And of course, they're more anxious. The rats in the last group not only have warning, but they have, in the course of training, they probably had 2 ways of controlling. One was in the early phases of avoidance learning when they were escaping. Light goes on, shock goes on, Animal
Escape.
turns off shock by shuttling. That behavior of going to the other side of the cage is called shuttling in English, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So early on, the animal had the opportunity to escape shock by moving away from it. That is enough to prevent learned helplessness. But subsequently, the animals developed avoidance responding as well, where light goes on or tone goes on. The animals move away from where shock will take place, and they never experience shock. These animals, reliable observations are that after full-fledged avoidance responding takes place, fear levels are very low and welfare is very high, right?
So is this to make a circle some kind of conditioning a safety cue?
Yeah, because in the context in which the animals have a predictive cue telling them when shock will take place, they therefore inversely, by implication, have a long period during which they know they're safe. The animal who successfully shuttles, there are two ways of dealing with that experimentally. I can decide to give the animal a marker that says, you have successfully avoided. But even if I don't do that, that does not mean that safety cues do not play a role. There's a great deal of evidence that the safety cues that the animal creates for itself, meaning in the past, when I have shuttled and moved my legs and know that I changed my location, I have not felt shock. Therefore, the feedback cues from skeletal movement become safety cues. In the same way, and my example for this is I ride motorcycles. I ride what in English we call dirt bikes. So it's like motocross bikes, enduro bikes, and stuff like that. So you crash a lot. It hurts. Usually the speeds are low, so you get back up and you get back on your motorcycle and ride. What that means is that if I negotiate a particular difficult place on a track or a trail, and I've done so successfully in the past, I know that feeling of going boom on my motorcycle and all will be well. I will not crash. I will not feel pain. And also I will feel exaltation because I have done something difficult well, right? Those are feedback cues talking to me and becoming positive reinforcers of my behavior. So what I'm introducing to you is the idea that maybe a rat at very high levels of avoidance responding goes, hangs out, relaxes, grooms, does the stuff rats do and goes, oh, there's that light. I'm in a shuttle. I've done it again. I'm successful. My feedback cues tell me I'm successful. God, I love avoiding. It's fucking great, right? I love avoiding. I feel so powerful when I avoid. I'm so good at this, right? And that's called, in laboratories, that
it's good.
The state of being in which the animal shows very high levels of coping is sometimes called mastery. I'm making guesses about what mastery feels like for a rat. I don't know, but I can tell you what rat mastery feels like for me. And the times when I feel the greatest sort of positive reinforcement, rewarding value as a result of demonstrating mastery is when I'm a little in danger because I'm doing something that can get me hurt. And these are, as I say in seminar, these are the experiences of my life that I remember the most, right? Riding the motorcycle, going fast, not crashing, going down the river in my kayak, not having to swim out of it, right? Like doing it right. So it's not just that I get to the bottom and go, oh, I didn't get hurt. I do the right thing at the right time with my boat and my paddle. And I go, that's why I do this sport. That's why I drove 5 hours up into the mountains. That's why I got up this morning. That's why I got in this suit because the water is so cold. That's why I do it again and again and again, because it's an opportunity for me to learn, to develop, and to practice mastery. And mastery feels fucking good, right? And what I'm implying to you and suggesting may be the case is that mastery feels good for animals as well. And that mastery of this kind is only developed when there are risks.
Yes. Yeah. I'm lacking of a quote that I have read in one of Robert Sapolsky's books called Behave, and you're for sure very well aware of that. There is a graph of it where it's about variable reinforcement schedules, and he, what is it? It's like a calculated risk that people go to casinos and play with these things, because it's very well known what could happen and what could not happen. And that's the thrill of it. Also knowing what might, what good things, as you, I'm already having problems in thinking English, but
well, it's gambling behavior is often interpreted strictly in terms of random reinforcement, and random reinforcement is certainly relevant to the prevalence of gambling, but there are complex physiological and also cognitive factors. One of the things that Sapolsky points out is that anticipatory cues begin to become proxies for reinforcers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
an anticipatory cue that tells me I'm about to be reinforced begins to, in a way, play the role of the reinforcer before it arrives, right? It's not just a predictor that the reinforcer is going to happen. It starts to become an end in itself. And then there are also complicated human dynamics and cognitive dynamics about the value of gaining a high value, unexpected reward versus losing other rewards. So a lot of very complex psychology comes into play, and people that understand that study gambling think about a lot of variables at once. It's not as simple just as random reinforcement, although, early in a gambling habit, I think random reinforcement is really, really important to get the gambling going. But then later on, I don't think gambling is necessarily maintained by nothing but low probability, high value rewards.
Mm-hmm.
It's maintained by other processes as well, like habitual responding, all kinds of stuff.
Good. I have a lot of takeaways from this conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time. Last but not least, I have this question from my previous guest. So I'm always asking my guests to ask a question for the next one, not knowing who it is or who it will be. And
that's very good. I like that. Go ahead.
Great. So my last guest was, apart from the conversations between Chris and me, was Magister Karl Weisenbacher, who is also a veterinarian or a vet, and he's in charge of the Prüf- und Koordinierungsstelle of the Messele Institute at the VetMed University in Vienna. So they are basically responsible for the federal tests for animal welfare.
Ein Tierarzt? Yeah, okay.
Also a dog trainer, but he's more doing dog school and puppy training, etc., which he's having in his own club, which is a great thing.
We need more people like that in the world, right? Trained veterinarians, trained psychologists who are also practitioners. These people are very valuable to us. Yeah,
for sure. It was a great conversation. I will send you the link. It's German though, but maybe you get the feeling. So his question was, not knowing who it will be, and I hope the translation gets the point. So I just read it to you. Probably, definitely, the fundamental coexistence in society can be improved, both in terms of human-human and human-animal interactions. And what influences can we have as individuals on this? So his question is, how can we influence the
das ist Ihre Frage für mich, ja?
This is it.
Okay. The first is to not mistake. I'm going to talk specifically about dogs and dog training. The first is not to mistake the dog for something that he's not. Let's remember what the dog is, which is a highly domesticated, selectively bred, ancestral predator. with the organs of mouth and also with the organs of behavior still intact to engage in predatory behavior, socially aggressive and socially competitive and aggressive behavior of all kinds, delightful behavior, lovable behavior, and also far from delightful and far from lovable behavior, right? So let's be accurate about what the dogs are. Respect them for what they are. Also love them for what they are, because they deserve it as marvels of nature. And also we make ourselves better in loving them, even when they can't be fair back and they can't be ethical back, right? They can only be dogs, but we make ourselves better by treating them fairly and the best that we possibly can, and by loving them, right? So number one, let's not mistake what they are. Next, let's become knowledgeable about what science really says, not just opinions about how to most successfully work with their behavior, and also how to come to conclusions about what welfare is for a dog, what stress is for a dog. And then also let's make thoughtful decisions about the harms that come, first of all, from certain kinds of training, which is what certain communities in dog training love to talk about, is the harms of certain kinds of training. But they don't tend to talk about the harms of failing to get the dog trained, right? There's a cost there. There's a harm there. So let's inform ourselves about behavior. Let's inform ourselves about the dogs. Let's inform ourselves about what science says about learning and behavior. And then finally, let's be thoughtful about the entire situation and make thoughtful decisions about, okay, I compete in agility. In order to get this one exercise, I can make my dog faster and I can become more likely to win a trophy if I put very much pressure right here to make just the right performance. This becomes a question. Is it ethically warranted to put pressure on your dog to make this jump a little more correct, to make yourself a little more successful in competition? I don't know. It's something we can talk about, right? Because if I put a lot of trouble into training my dog, it means my dog has very rich days where I interact with him all day long and I spend all weekend with him and so forth. And so all of this has to be factored into whether or not it's ethically defensible for me to put pressure on it. But at the end of the day, it's just a trophy. Mm-hmm. Same dog. Let's say that the predatory instinct that I use to drive the dog's performance in agility, because at the end he gets to bite something, let's say that that becomes attached to traffic of vehicles on the highway, half a kilometer from my house. Let's say that it becomes attracted to deer in the woods. Let's say it becomes attached to my next door neighbor's 5-year-old son. Mm-hmm. Now, if I have a way of controlling and correcting this behavior that involves pressure, is the calculus different now? And notice I'm not talking about working dogs. Notice I'm not saying that ethics belongs to the training of companion dogs and pets, but the ethics are different from working dogs. No, ethics are ethics. But what changes is the stakes, the harms of not getting the dog trained. If you're training a certain kind of working dog and you mess it up, people die. If you're training another kind of companion dog and you mess it up, sometimes it's a more trivial mistake or a trivial failure. Or if you're training in agility, maybe you don't win the title. But on the other hand, if your agility wants to chase the traffic on the highway, maybe your failure in training kills the dog. And in my opinion, this implies two things. One of them is that the ethics of using pressure or not using pressure are determined by the outcome of the training. What are the stakes? And that the stakes can be very high for companion dogs, not just working dogs.
Great. Very nice answer. I will send Tim the link to this show and to your answer. And so now it's about you. What is your question to the unknown guest?
Wow, that's give me just a moment. You can cut out when you edit the interview. You can cut out me going. Let me see.
No, it's good. I like the thinker posing.
And I'm trying to think whether a philosophical question
will it be a technical in every direction.
Okay. Okay, I am going to let me see. Let me think about this. Okay, I'm going to pose a question. Great. So this is a question to which I have, and it's not technical, it's more ethical. It more has to do with the philosophy of dog keeping and training. So whoever comes on after me probably has a point of view on this. But I recently talked to somebody who engaged in a discussion about the dialectic between purely positive dog training versus all the other dog training. And one of my friend who was talking to this person, the person essentially said that it is improper, unethical, inhumane to use pressure in dog training because the dog cannot consent to being involved in this situation. Wie sagt man consent auf Deutsch?
I have to figure it out. Give me a second.
Das meint ich gebe my agreement to what is going to happen. I have consented. I have agreed to.
Yeah.
Okay. So like they said you cannot use pressure in dog training because I can see the dog's consent when I provide food. But the dog cannot provide consent to an aversive procedure. This is essentially the question that was posed to my friend. He had an answer. I have an answer. Let's see what your next interview subject says about it. What do they think about the issue of, can a dog give consent? Do trained dogs give consent? Should I limit myself only to things, behavior, training procedures to which the dog gives his consent or her consent?
Great. I will love to ask this or forward this question to our next guest. Honestly, I have no clue yet who it will be. So I've just had a series of quite a few episodes now. Probably there will be a little break, but I will definitely let you know who it will be, and I will send you the link to that episode. So...
Okay, and before we go, let me say un peu en français. J'ai mes notes ici. Je regrette que mon français n'est pas assez pour conducter cette conversation en français, mais j'espère que votre... I was going to say this to you, that I hope that your English was sufficient for the... J'espère que votre anglais, les spectateurs, les concurrents, que votre anglais est suffisant pour me comprendre. J'espère de vous rencontrer personnellement dans l'avenir. Au revoir.
Au revoir. I did not understand everything, but I will definitely...
That's probably because my French is so bad, but hopefully they got the point. Because I started first in German dog training, and then in the mid 80s, I became interested in French dog training. And the French cynophiles, les cynophiles françaises et francophones sont très près de mon cœur.
Very nice. Very nice. Maybe, I hope we will have the time to talk about those experiences and adventures of you being in Europe, trying out and finding out more about different kinds of sports, and also what effects different sports have on the working dog field, and also nowadays, because of the different aspects in French ring, Belgian ring, KNPV, IGP. I would be very interested about that, but we will find a new date. probably.
Okay, and if any of your viewers or listeners would like to hear about the Kynology Symposium that will take place in just another week or so, one thing I'll do is I'll just say it is going to be in Santa Rosa, California, at the Michael Ellis School for Dog Trainers. So if you go to the website for the Michael Ellis School, you should see what you need to find the details and the facts about the event. You can register to participate in the event online. And if you do so, afterwards, you'll get a videotape of the entire event as well. It's a five-day symposium.
Wow.
Where I'll talk about a lot of this kind of stuff. And then Michael and Forrest Mickey will do demonstrations designed to show the application of the scientific and the behavioral principles that I discuss in dog training, and also many ethical and value judgments surrounding dog training as well. And then also I'll provide you with a more exact link. And if you can get that out to people, then they can use it to figure out what's going on with this seminar. We should have another one of these events. It's unclear where it will happen at this point, but we should have another of these in April of next year.
Awesome. So please send me the link. I will put it to the show notes. I will also highlight it. I cannot recommend it enough. I had only one morning, but I really regretted having to leave so early this summer. So for everyone who has the chance to participate, go ahead and register for this. Is there anything else that you would like to highlight, Stewart?
Nothing at all. Thank you for inviting me on. It's been a great pleasure. I hope that we get a chance to spend some time together. I'd love to watch you work detector dogs. It sounds like you're very thoughtful, and I'd really like a chance to learn some stuff from you.
Oh, that sounds great. Maybe I send you some of the clips here and there and
sure,
ask you for your opinion.
I'd love to see them.
Great.
Yeah, I'd love to see them.
So for everyone listening, I hope you liked it as much as I did. If so, let us know. Send us a comment, give us a rating, and also share this with your friends and colleagues so that more people get more different thoughts and opinions about the ways of training dogs and people. Yeah, thank you so much, and all the best. No cursing, almost no cursing in this 2 hours.
Almost no cursing. If you come to a symposium, if you come to a symposium, there's going to be a lot of cussing for sure.
Great. All right. So enjoy your day. All the best, and see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I hope I do see you soon. Goodbye.